Let's open up God's Word. We're going to be in Hebrews chapter 12. I travel a lot. I've been to somewhere around 36 to 38 different countries in my lifetime. There was a season when I senior pastored in Dallas that I was traveling overseas about 4 times a year. I've traveled with my girls overseas, and I can just tell you there's good travel, there's bad travel. Let me give you an example of good travel. Good travel is I'm by myself and I'm not worried about anybody else's bags. Amen? How many, literally, when we landed from Africa, we're in San Francisco, and my bags come off the conveyor belt, and I'm sitting there having to wait for everybody's bag on the team to come off the conveyor belt so that I can leave. Traveling by yourself is great because you're not having to worry about anybody else's stuff. That's good travel. Bad travel is traveling with small children. How many have ever traveled with small children before on an airplane? It is like the 3rd stage of Dante's Inferno. It's awful. It's terrible. I remember when I traveled with our girls, so we lived in North Carolina for a season, and Rachel finished her medical school up in Oklahoma, and so we were traveling back and forth quite a bit with babies. And I can tell you, when we had Clara, it was tough because Rachel would be carrying Clara and the diaper bag, and me, Dad, was carrying a stroller that she refused to sit in, a car seat that she didn't like, her little Barbie bag, whatever she had at the time, Rachel's bag, and my carry-on. And there was no greater joy than when I was able to put those in the overhead storage and sit down for 2.5 hours of peace. And then it started all over again because I'd have to grab all the bags out, find the rental car, find whoever's picking us up, and drag all this stuff. I really believe that if I visited an orthopedic surgeon, he would see all kinds of scar tissue from the time I had to travel with my baby. But then there came 2. And I thought 1 was hard. 2 was even harder. I mean, think about traveling with your baby with all that stuff, but also trying to manage a 3-year-old through an airport. Worst days of my life. Hard days of my life. And I know what you're thinking, Jason, why didn't you rent one of those carts? Well, number 1, I didn't think about it back then. Number 2, I was cheap. I was a man. I can carry all the bags myself. And you're going, well, that's just stupid. But here's the thing. I can ask you the same question. Why in life do you choose to carry all the baggage that you carry? All the hurts, all the anxieties, all the fears, all the insecurities. We carry it all throughout life, and we don't realize how damaging that is to our spiritual walk. In the book of Hebrews, here's what the Hebrew writer says, chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. This is an amazing passage written to an amazing people at an amazing time in history. And before we dive in and pick this passage apart, I want to tell you my stated goal today is to help you get rid of the baggage so that you can run the Christian race with freedom. I meet a lot of Christians, and I can tell you most of them are running either with a limp or with baggage. Most of them are pulled down by the weight of things that they can't move forward in their Christian journey. And so they circle the mountain over and over and over again and can never actually walk into their personal promised land because they are dragged down by baggage in their life. Now, the letter of Hebrews is a fascinating letter. It was written to a Jewish congregation of believers somewhere between, right before the destruction of the temple. And one of the reasons I've always loved Hebrews is because it's unnamed. Nobody takes credit for it. There are various theories of why nobody takes credit for the book of Hebrews, but my favorite is that perhaps it was written by a woman, but yet endorsed by Paul, so it gets associated with Paul. But Hebrews is actually not a letter, but a sermon in long form. And at this time, when this letter was written, Romans and Jews were headed for a bloody clash, and there was persecution of Christians on the rise, and the long-expected return of Jesus had seemed to be delayed even beyond some people's endurance. I mean, think about AD 70 at this moment, maybe AD 68. You're some 35 years removed from Jesus ascending into the heavens and saying that he was going to return. So at this moment within the church, many were facing so many difficulties that they were not sure if they had made the right decision to follow Jesus. Some in the church that this letter was written to were wondering if they had made a terrible mistake. Jesus might not have been the Son of God. Jesus was maybe an imposter, and they were duped. This is what the book of Hebrews was written to, a people who had lost hope in their future. This is why the book of Hebrews themes is that Jesus is greater than Moses, the angels, the sacrifices, because many were starting to go, if we made a mistake, we should go back to our old way of life. They wanted to return because they just weren't sure. So the book of Hebrews, the author of Hebrews would stand up and would preach and say that Jesus is better than Moses, who you adore. Jesus is better or bigger than the angels, who you revere. Jesus is even more than the sacrifices that you put all your weight in. The whole letter of Hebrews is a letter about endurance and about the faithful going through working it out, working their faith out despite the odds seeming to be against them. And the Hebrew writer in Hebrews chapter 12 tells them three keys to hold on to their faith. They are to lay aside weight and sin. They are to run with endurance. And then they are to fix their eyes on Jesus. So today, in order to help you receive your freedom, I want us to look at each of these three phrases because each of them pack a powerful punch. Let's start with lay aside every weight and sin. Now, how many watch the Olympics? Not the abomination of the opening ceremonies, but how many have watched the competition of the Olympics, the races, the gymnastics, the basketball? I was sitting in a lounge yesterday as I was coming back from a family reunion, and the USA versus France basketball game was on, and everybody's watching it. And when Steph Curry went on his phenomenal run, if you didn't see it, it was phenomenal. He was raining threes from everywhere to kind of go ahead on the game. The whole lounge was erupting in cheers. I mean, there's something about the Olympics when we see that USA on somebody's jersey, we kind of root for them, we get behind and we get excited because they represent us. Well, our Olympics actually pale in comparison to the Greek Olympics. The Greeks actually had 3 large games every single year. In Athens, they would compete in this monumental way. And so when the runners would approach the starting line, they had this routine. They would come out of their, their little celebration area, and they would run the stadium, and they would go down to a far box where the emperor or the king or the governor of the area would be, and they would bow down and they would wash their hands in blood, and they would pledge to that emperor or leader or king that they had done everything they could possibly do to get prepared for these games. Not only would they prepare themselves physically, because they were the fittest people in the kingdom, they would also have pledged that they were ready mentally and they were ready spiritually. It was almost a religious event, these Olympics. And as they would get ready to race, like the basketball players of old, they'd rip off their clothing, and back then they didn't have shorts underneath it. They would rip off all their clothing to get ready to race. Why? Because they did not want anything to hinder them in their running. They didn't want to get tripped up in a robe. They didn't want to get tripped up on a sandal. They didn't want to get tripped up with any piece of clothing. As weird as that is to us 21st century people, the closest thing we could get to is just seeing our runners now where they wear the tight singlets so tight that it's against their skin because they don't want anything to trip them up. And this is what the Olympics were about for Greece. So when the writer of Hebrews is comparing this to this race or to lay everything aside, what he is saying is you have to strip everything off and run. Now, what's interesting about this passage, what I find interesting, I'd never seen it before. I actually studied it. And you would think as a theologian and as a preacher that I would see it in its normal lens, but I'd never seen it before until I started studying this passage. It says, lay aside every weight and sin. See, oftentimes what we do is we combine them. And we say weight is sin and sin is weight. No. The writer is specific and he says, lay aside every weight and every sin. Now we know that sin will cripple our Christian walk. We understand that. If you walked into church today and you don't understand that, let me just be really clear. If you have sin in your heart, it separates you from God. There's nothing you can do about it, only accepting Him and His sacrifice. That's the only thing you can do. But let's set that to aside for a second, because most of us in this room understand that our sin separates us from God. That you can't even really have a Christian journey if you have sin that is perpetually hindering you. But let's talk about weight for a second. You know what the Greek word is for weight? It's weight. Y'all thought I was going to say something clever. I wasn't. It's weight. Basically, when you render it out, it's a mass or a bulk or a weight or an anchor. And what's interesting about the Hebrew writer is he says weight and sin are completely different. Now, weight can be something good for society, but maybe not good for you. That's the idea of weight. So think about it this way. Weight can be a relationship. Now, there's nothing wrong inherently with relationships, but that relationship, and if you're weighed down by a relationship, you know what I mean when I say that relationship, immediately somebody comes to your mind. Ooh, it got quiet. I'm just assuming you're just digging in and listening. But weight can be a relationship. Weight can be a job. Weight can be something that's happened to you in your past. Weight can be good, but not good for you. Paul says this when he's writing about his own struggles. He says, this is 1 Corinthians 6, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything. So wait might be lawful, but it might not be good for you. That's good. That needs to be written down, tweeted, all that kind of stuff. Because a lot of times what we do is we just think, well, it's okay to do, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that or be a part of that or align with that. And we don't realize that that thing is actually weighing us down. I thought I was preaching to a Pentecostal church this morning. How many times do we go into the good in sacrifice of the great? How many times? It's lawful for us, but it's not beneficial to us. So the Hebrew writer is saying, listen, not only deal with your sin, but deal with that weight. That stuff that's there that you know you need to get rid of. It's not sin in your life, but you know that it is holding you back from God. I'm not a legalist. I'm not a closet legalist. But if what you listen to every day may not be sinful, but it's not edifying and it's not encouraging and it's not motivating your spirit to lead a Christian life, and it's pulling you this way when you need to be going that way, you need to get rid of it. The things you watch, I'm not a legalist, but the things that you watch, it may be sports. Like in the fall, I can tell you, I have a great battle, and it's known as college football. I love college football, more particularly the Oklahoma Sooners. They are my jam. I love them. But there are times, Rachel will tell you, that I will turn the TV on and watch game after game after game, and then I'll look at my watch. I'm like, oh my goodness, it's 8 o'clock at night. I was supposed to do this, or I was supposed to do that. If there's something that's weighing you down, it could be perfectly harmless, not sinful, benign, but for you, it is keeping you from going after God in a greater and deeper way. Lay it aside. It's weight. Does that make sense? Okay? Y'all got real quiet there for a minute. Felt like I was picking on your own sin, but maybe I was. Okay. But what's interesting about this passage is the Hebrew writer says that we are to emphatically strip it off because it doesn't help our walk. But what he adds in this sentence is he says, let us also lay aside every weight. Now, what does that also mean? Again, I'm a theologian. I'm a guy who studies the Bible. Words matter. So why did the Hebrew writer put also there? What is happening here? Well, the writer is comparing our race to all of those in the Hall of Fame chapter in the Bible, which is Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 12 is a continuation of that. So he's saying all these wonderful saints of the church, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Gideon, David, and others had to lay aside some things in order to finish their race. And for you, if you're going to finish your race successfully, you have to set aside these things as well. Why? Well, it leads to the next point is with weight, you can't run with endurance. Now, I know you don't believe this, but I'm going to say it anyway. And you're going to think I'm a liar. But I do endurance races. Thank you for not laughing. I saw snickers. It hurts my feelings. I saw whispers like, no, he's not. He had a donut this morning. You're right. I had a donut this morning. And guess what I can't do with the donut in my system? I can't go out and run 10 miles. But I've run endurance races. I've done triathlons. I've run extended running races. But I can tell you this, when I run, I have to be about 20 pounds lighter. I have to drop my weight in order to finish the race with endurance. And this is what the writer is saying. He's saying, lay aside everything because you have a long race to run. So I work with college students, Bible college students. And I meet Bible college students all the time who are just like, I got to get out there. I got to get my preach on. I don't have time for training. I don't have time for education. I don't have time for study. And what I always pull them aside and I go, how old are you? I'm 21. I said, you do realize that you have 50 years, if Jesus tarries, of ministry work to accomplish. That's a long race to run. And if you don't prepare yourself adequately, you will be out of the race by the time you're 30. And almost like a prophet, the ones who drop out of their preparation are done before they're 30 in ministry. We all have to run this Christian life with endurance. Look at what it says again. I want to read it to you so you understand it. It says, let us run the race that is set before us. Now, scholars would argue what this race actually is. Some people would point to the marathon. Other people point to the pentathlon. Most theologians tend to lean to the pentathlon, the Greek pentathlon. And the Greek pentathlon consisted of several different events, much like our modern pentathlon. They'd throw a javelin, they'd run a race, they'd do long jump, they'd do shot put or whatever. They would do all these things, except the Greek pentathlon was way different from our pentathlon. After they exhausted themselves on all these different events, there would be one final event in the Greek pentathlon. They would put gloves on, leather gloves on, and they would step into the ring and wrestle and box an opponent. Now just think about that for a moment. You've swam, you've thrown the javelin, you've ran really fast, you jumped really hard, and as a reward, they give you gloves to fight Conor McGregor. That's your reward. It was brutal and grueling, and although you couldn't punch one another, those leather gloves just tended to glance people, and people would be bloodied and broken and bruised after this pentathlon. This is the race the Hebrew writer is probably referring to. Is that after you've run the race, you're still in a battle. And you're going to have to endure time and time and time and time again. Here's what I say. People are either in a valley, coming out of a valley, or going into a valley. Do you understand that? If you've lived long enough, you understand that. You know that your Christian walk isn't all tulips and sunshine. And I would never preach a gospel that included tulips and sunshine. Because every time I read the scriptures, it tells us things. It tells us that there will be suffering, that there will be trials, that there will be temptations, that we have to work this out with endurance, because you're going to walk out of here one day and all hell's going to break loose in your life. And if you're not told that you are going to walk through suffering, you're going to think that you've been sold a bill of goods. Walking the Christian life is never easy. All of life includes pain and suffering and hurt. And so we have to run a race with endurance. Now remember who he's writing to. He's writing to a people so beaten down with the stresses of life that they're having difficulties and suffering that they are on the verge of giving up. And he says, take everything off and run your race. And he compares it to Hebrews chapter 11. Just look at what Hebrews chapter 11 is. This is almost a public pastoral counseling session that the writer of Hebrews is talking about. Look what he says. What more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. The writer is saying, if you are feeling the harsh realities of life, you're not alone. You're in good company, but hear me, church. Your faith allows you to deal with it. We live in a culture that does not equip us well to the realities of life. I would dare say that our church at times does not help us deal with it either. One of the reasons I take my kids on mission trips, my two daughters on mission trips, and I try to get people out of America is I want them to see that their life is really not that bad. The kids we ministered to last week, most of them, the only clothes they have is their school uniform. They don't have a phone. They barely have food to eat or running water. We will deal with the harsh realities of life. And in our culture, we seem to have lost the word endurance and persecution. We don't like those words. We don't like being told that we're going to have to endure for a season. We don't like the idea that we could be persecuted. I don't either. I love the fact that I can go to my microwave and pop a meal within about 2 minutes. I love that. I love the fact that I can communicate with people across the globe. I love the fact that I can go to my faucet and turn on water that's not brown. I love that. But whether you're in the West or whether you're in the global South, you will all experience pain and suffering. I want you to look at the passage again. It says, let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. I love that phrase. You know why I love that phrase? Because it's saying that we all have a different race to run. Some of you will experience loss of loved ones or children, and that is your race that you have to endure through. Some of you will face cancer, and that is a race you're going to have to run through. Some of you may be in prison for the gospel, and that is a race you have to run through. But all of us have a race, and your race is not the same as your neighbor's. So often in church, we sit there and go, Johnny must have it easy. Johnny doesn't have the struggles that I have. Yeah, you're right. He has different struggles and a different race to run. Theologian R. Kent Hughes says this, we each have a specific course mapped out for us, and the course for each runner is unique. Some are relatively straight, some are all turns, some seem uphill, some are flat, a flat hiking path. All are long, but some are longer. But the glory is each of us, no exceptions, can finish the race marked out for us. I may not be able to run your course and you may find it impossible to run mine, but I can finish my race and you can finish yours. We all have a race to run, and we're all called to run with endurance. And here's what I know, and the great John Newton so eloquently states it. Everything is necessary that he sends, and nothing can be necessary that he withholds. Everything he sends your way is necessary for your life and your development and your growth. Amen. Anything he holds back from you was not necessary for you or your development or your growth. You will run your race effectively with endurance if you strip off the baggage that's weighing you down. And the third point is this: if you fix your eyes on Jesus. Look what the writer says. Looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Now, there's a phrase here that's hard for us to understand. At least it's hard for me, because it's the phrase that for the joy set before him. What is the Hebrew writer trying to say? Well, I think we see his thoughts by looking at other texts within the book. So just look at a couple with me. Hebrews 10:34, for you had compassion on those in prison, and you joyfully accepted the plundering of your property, since you knew that you yourselves had a better possession, an abiding one. Look at this one. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw the child was beautiful and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasure of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt. And look at this one, Hebrews 13. Therefore, let us go to him outside the camp and bear the reproach he endured. For here we have no lasting city, but we seek the city that is to come. So what does it mean for the joy that was set before him? He was able to endure because something greater was out there. We give up something to gain something far greater. So when the Hebrew writer says looking to Jesus, he's saying that we look to him. He was the example that endured the cross and the shame of it because there was something greater waiting on him. So we get rid of all our baggage. We run our race through the hardships and pain of life because something is greater just beyond us. So follow Jesus' example and focus on him. That's what the Hebrew writer is saying. I've been transfixed with the Olympics this year. I don't know if it's because it's the only thing on TV in foreign countries that I can watch. And I love watching races. And if you've ever watched a race intently or have listened to the interviews of somebody running, they typically say that when they get in the starting blocks, they can't hear the crowd. They don't even really realize at that point that there are other runners around them. All they are focused on is that finish line. And so as the gun goes off and they sprint out of the blocks, all they're seeing is the end, the goal. I mean, you really think about the Olympics. People will spend 10 to 20 years of their life, many of them training for that one singular moment that might last 10 seconds. They focus all their energy on one thing. Now we would, just in the natural world, we go, that's crazy. How could you give your life and your whole purpose for 10 seconds of time? But when that gun goes off, that's all they are seeing is that finish line. If you watch the 4x100 race, the women's 4x100 race, there was a moment near the finish line where the American sprinter is running and she is catching up and she's passing everybody and she takes a glance and she looks. It's kind of a baller move. She looks and she keeps on going. But if you look at the overall picture, they won the race, but as she looked, she lost split seconds and the British runner got closer to her. You know how many times we take looks in our Christian walk? Right? I run, right? Not well, not fast. It's kind of more of a walk. But if I'm constantly looking at my feet, I'm not going to see the path. Rachel sometimes runs with me, and this is a weird flex, but I'm way faster than her. She's coming back from Oklahoma today. I'm way faster than you, babe. Way faster. And so if we run together and I try to pay attention to her, I lose my pace. I lose my stride. I lose all the benefits of that run that morning. And so often in our Christian race, we're so concerned with things around us that we cannot control. Look, I've been on many courses that are the same course for different runners, but it's totally different for me. So if I was to race with a marathoner, that marathoner might be racing in the middle of the day where the weather is perfect, but because I'm so slow, I get there like at 2 o'clock in the afternoon where it's 115 degrees. It's a totally different course. But I can't worry about that. I've got to focus on my race. And what happens for so many of us believers, so many of us Christians, is we're so worried about other people and other things and other ideas. And I can't believe that person said that over there. And it takes you off course. I can't believe they're doing that over there. No, your race is straight ahead of you. Quit looking side to side and focus on Jesus, the author and perfecter of it all. Here's the thing that I know about believers. Here's the thing I know is that if we get distracted, we're going to get derailed. I mean, think about people who've come in this church before who've gotten saved. And they are here for a couple weeks, and nobody's taught them to focus on Jesus, the author and finisher of their faith. And they've heaped legalism after legalism after legalism on them, and it's taken them off course, and they don't see the race for what it is, and they feel like they can't do it anymore. They get distracted, and they get derailed. My girls are older now, 13 and 17, 14 and 17. This week, we took Claire's senior pictures. It was... For some reason, I had Butterfly Kisses singing in my head the whole time. When we travel now, I make them carry their own bags. And can I tell you, there is so much freedom in that. When your kids get to the age where they can carry your own bags, that alone requires a celebration. I'm not having to mind them so much, like don't touch that, don't lick that off the floor. They're carrying their own bags. They're mature, and it makes traveling so much easier. So much easier. And can I tell you, if you would drop your baggage, your Christian journey is going to be so much easier. The only way you're ever going to find freedom is letting go of the things that are tangling you up. Listen to what Paul says, and I'm closing. Donovan, you can come on up. Here's what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 6. Or do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived, neither sexually immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who practice homosexuality, nor thieves, nor greedy, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. Look at verse 11. And such were some of you. But you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of our Lord Jesus and by the Spirit of God. Stop letting other people and your baggage define you. You're not a former drug addict. You are set free, a child of God with a testimony. You are not unwanted or unloved, divorced, single mother. You are a woman with a purpose, and you are loved by the Father. Your baggage does not define you. I refuse to allow my carry-on to carry over any longer and affect my life. You are washed. You are sanctified. You are set free. So what we have to do is let go of it all and find freedom. What you hold on to does not define you. Christ does, and with him you can endure.